So in an age when commerce versus art is constantly at question, as much as we all would like to bash products that companies churn out for being obvious cash grabs on superior older properties, and the studios for milking said properties for all they're worth, rarely is the question asked, would the choices that we would make, speaking as defenders of the art half, truly be better consequences as we claim that they would? We see in video after video on YouTube made by people trying to defend animation as a medium rather than a genre against everything that seems to slate it with the perceived notion that it's a kid's medium. But sometimes, for all the good intentions that a lot of these videos seem to have, some of them feel more like a crusade on a creator's personal agenda and desire to tear stuff down that they don't like, rather than speaking for the perception of the medium as a whole. Basically saying what does or doesn't have value, even speaking like it's objective truth a lot of the time, and even declaring what studios should or should not do, doesn't speak about the medium so much as the individual themselves. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of the Minions, and I do agree that they're oversaturating the market and that too many family films are trying too hard to emulate them, but I'm still not going to say that the people who like Minions are wrong or simple-minded for doing so, or blame them for any supposed degradation of the quality of mainstream animated films. I have family members who love Minions for crying out loud. I used to be one of those people who fell into the trap of playing the blame game long ago, and I realized just what kind of person that makes you. The only people I'm going to confidently say are responsible for something becoming undeservedly successful are hate watchers who pay to see something just so they can bash it and hypocritically complain that they want something else. But the whole notion about what one person will stand for as an artist to ensure that it's being treated with the respect it deserves is an interesting one. And it does remind me of something similar with another famous artist, albeit one in a totally different medium, and one of my biggest inspirations of all time. Bill Watterson, whom you might be familiar with as the creator of the beloved Calvin and Hobbes. Now, full context, Calvin and Hobbes, to me, is one of the greatest things in this world, not just comic strips. To say that it was a major inspiration to me would be an understatement. And for me, reading about Bill Watterson's side of the story when I was just 16 years old was one of the biggest eye-openers in regards to the whole clash between artistic integrity versus satisfying the market. When I was younger and enjoying Calvin and Hobbes in book collections, I do remember being fairly disappointed that I could no longer see them in the paper, or that I wouldn't see them as a TV special or any plushies of them. But once I read Watterson's reasons for it, I've grown to respect it, so that one of my favorite things wasn't milked dry for its worth, and that its legacy has maintained its quality throughout. In 1989, Watterson gave a speech at the Festival of Cartoon Art at Ohio State University called The Cheapening of the Comics, where he defended the comics as an art form, and that the newspaper industry was being detrimental to it. You can learn more about the details by watching the 2013 documentary Dear Mr. Watterson, or Frank James's YouTube video on the subject, which I'll link below. The reception of the speech, of course, was mixed. Some comic artists who felt that they were being abused and or undermined by the business higher-ups applauded him for it, and a few even decided from him that they had to break away from this path of newspapers and take their creations elsewhere to reach their full potential. Others, who were big names in the industry, took the speech as some sort of personal attack on the way that they ran their business. Like they were being told by some kid that they were artistic frauds, if you will, who didn't deserve the position they had worked their way up to. And of course, newspaper editors saw Watterson as some sort of pretentious narcissist who was getting all upset for not getting his way when they were paying to run strips and felt their needs should take priority. But the ironic thing is that newspaper cartoons were never intended to be art in the beginning. The sole purpose of their invention was to sell newspapers. They were just illustrations of the stories that were being reported, not their own little worlds of their own little characters, until later in development, kind of like the direction that film took when you think about it. In fact, I think a whole subsection of history of animation can be applied to this scenario as well. The whole one about how some of the most beloved animated TV shows and movies of all time were greenlit with the intention of being nothing more than commercials for toys. And now comics, like film, are going digital where artistic possibilities are endless and there are, in some ways, a whole new range of opportunities to attract an audience. But speaking of toys and going back to Calvin and Hobbes for a minute, Bill Watterson is also recognized for his refusal to turn Calvin and Hobbes into any merchandise of any kind. No TV specials, no stuffed toys, no coffee mugs, nothing. Despite the fact that there was a high demand for it at the time, right up there with Snoopy and Garfield. He didn't want his creations saturating the market to the point when people started to hate them and wanted them to go away, and he didn't want to start a business empire where a bunch of business people and merchandise-hungry clients would bombard him with phone calls and disrupt his personal life, and he didn't want the endorsement of products to distract him from the overall quality. He said, "When a cartoonist licenses his characters, his voice is co-opted by the business concerns of toy producers, television producers, and advertisers. The cartoonist's job is no longer to be an original thinker. His job is to keep the characters profitable. The characters become celebrities, endorsing companies and products, avoiding controversy, and saying whatever someone will pay them to say. At that point, the strip has no soul, and with its integrity gone, a strip loses its deeper significance." Now there are those classic tales of something like A Charlie Brown Christmas, which started out as just a last-minute pitch to cash in on the already high-at-the-time success of Peanuts, and sponsored by Coca-Cola, of all things, no less. And even then, Charles Schulz fought the network executives to have several decisions that were unconventional at the time, particularly Linus reciting the passage from the Bible. So why couldn't Watterson potentially find the same success, or at the very least find some middle ground? Well, Watterson did acknowledge at one point that Universal Press tried to get him to compromise on the limited licensing, but he still stood his ground and refused. Now, while that might sound very impervious and stuck up to some, I think that Watterson did what he did partially because he felt, at least subconsciously, that it wouldn't take a lot for a syndicate to go back on their word if somebody came along and threw enough money at them. We did see Disney do that in Aladdin, after all, when they cast Robin Williams as the genie. And in spite of all this, the really ironic thing is that Watterson never really intended for Calvin and Hobbes to be any sort of paragon of art. He said, "I didn't start out thinking of cartoons as any kind of art. Growing up, art seemed impenetrable. Cartoons were the opposite. Anyone can make pictures with these. I liked cartoons because they weren't art. They were just funny. I gradually took cartooning more seriously as I went along, but it was only years later, while drawing Calvin and Hobbes, that the issue of art had any urgency. When I saw that editors would squeeze, stretch, and cut up my drawings to fit the space they allotted, and when I saw that I had no final control over whether my characters appeared on boxer shorts or not, I was stunned that publishers would mess around with somebody else's creation. Suddenly, I was defending my writing and cartoons as an art." And of course, Universal Press Syndicate could have screwed Watterson over and replaced him with another artist behind the strip, and culminated billions of dollars in merchandise for it. But they didn't. They accommodated his needs the whole way through, even though he had no business-related concerns. So I think, through that, it would be irresponsible to automatically label all businesses as having their concerns being the only ones that matter to them. I mean, it's true that's often the case, and it sucks when it is, but the truth of the matter is that it's not that black and white. But then realizing how mentally exhausting and even toxic endless fan loyalty can be, I've also grown to graciously accept that some people will make their own Calvin and Hobbes merchandise without Watterson's approval. Not so much those nasty bootleg bumper stickers of Calvin peeing on something, but as far as people making their own fan art, animations, plushies, and t-shirts, as long as they're done as a personal love letter to the material that these people hold near and dear to them, and not out of a desire to shamelessly exploit it for personal gain, I think it's great. Of course, from this arises the question, if you could make money leaving your own mark on this work that you love so much, why wouldn't you? There are quite a number of people out there who abide by the death of the author philosophy that authors and creators say on whatever happens to his or her work neither dictate nor be exempt from the final outcome, because as we've seen, there are plenty of instances of adaptations of works that are beloved by just about everybody except the author. Case in point, P.L. Travers. We all know the story of how Mary Poppins came to be, how Travers was very resistant to handing her personal work over to those who wanted to capitalize on it, and how she was the one person who despised the final result. But the truth of the matter is that regardless of how she felt about it, the movie did help increase her book sales when she needed it. Even if Disney did get a hold of the rights to Mary Poppins because money, it's still a fantastic movie in its own right. And then, when it came to adapting Mary Poppins to Broadway and trying to persuade Travers to include the iconic songs from the film against her wishes, Cameron Mackintosh said, "Eventually I asked her, 'What is it you don't like about the film?' And she immediately responded that the filmmakers never understood Mary Poppins. It was evident she spoke her mind, and I reckoned because of that she would have no objections to just plain talking. I continued, whatever criticisms you may have about the film, I believe that it caught the essential essence of Mary Poppins. Maybe not in the style you would have liked, but it did so all the same. Otherwise, it could have never caught the world's imagination. If you're telling me that you won't allow anything from the Disney film to be in the stage version, then, even if I am given permission to go ahead with the rights to the books, I'd have to say to you that I wouldn't want to do it. Because for one thing, I don't feel that it would be right, and for another, I don't believe that anyone would want to come and see it. Now, we've all recognized that it would be rather selfish of us to try and coerce a creator into giving us what we wanted rather than respecting his or her decisions. However, it is possible to go the opposite extreme of selfishness and entitlement. We see fans acting entitled and trying to start petitions to remake some installments or finales to their favorite movies or shows, and getting super protective over their nostalgia being exploited, even to the point in both cases of harassing creators online and even issuing death threats. Now, I know how hard it can be to respond rationally to news that feels unpleasant to hear, and the feeling that having to accept things you don't like is the equivalent of admitting defeat and losing a battle. But for those of you out there who want to claim that any creators are failing in art, bear in mind that they have a lot more riding on their shoulders than you will ever know. Studios and businesses take a lot of heat on behalf of the creators bringing their works to life. They're responsible for all the monetary write-downs when products don't turn a profit. And when product sales fail, they can't afford to let creators keep their jobs, so yeah, creators do have a duty beyond satisfying the desires of a select group of fans, even those self-proclaimed true fans. Now, giving everyone the opportunity to have a say on their opinions on a given work is theoretically a good thing. It's good that influences on what direction an industry goes in is not limited to those who work in the industry or review for news articles. The problem is having the power to influence the way commercial art is made and abusing it out of a misguided sense of heroism for fighting for one's favorite medium. There is a big difference between speaking for a medium you love and just speaking for yourself and anyone who happens to agree with you. But really, as far as the notions like all these trends in the industry are hurting the medium of animation and making it look like an invalid medium that's for kids and whatnot, or even switching out animation and filling in the blank with the likes of picture books, video games, and a whole other assortment of storytelling mediums that snooty upper crust critics will perceive as low art. It seems to be a rule in our culture that if something is accessible to kids and can be easily understood by kids, it must automatically be for kids. Like it's only fine art if it can be understood by the above average minds. But seriously, screw anyone who thinks that any storytelling medium is beneath them just based on who it can be enjoyed by or whatever. If there's one thing to take away from this video, it's that the real value of a piece of work will come from what it does for people as people, and how it inspires them to be better people. There will always be those who are aiming to push the envelope of whatever medium they're working in, but those who do so are taking their time with it, as they should, and others are rushing out quickly and playing it safe, if sometimes competently, just to make buttloads of money. But those who do the latter are not the driving force of said genre or medium so much as certain fans fear they are. For every exceptionally rare gem, there will always be a slew of low-effort knockoffs. Or there will always be businesses making dumb decisions for capitalist reasons. But the only two factors that will truly establish a worth of a piece of work are A, what difference it makes to the life of each individual, and B, time. Of course, not everything is going to stand the test of time, but history has proved us wrong on several occasions about which works would fade into obscurity or not. And bear in mind, it's very, very hard to cast one's own shadow and emerge from those who came before. While it is preferable to go independent and pave one's own path as an artist, it is still at the expense of being insured or assisted in case anything goes wrong, as well as a lot more work for you to do with a lot less income. We will only be rewarded in our search for something exceptional if we go in with an open mind, even looking in places we never expected to find them, and consider looking at something from all perspectives, not just our own. That, I believe, is where the real value of art comes from.